Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host, Rana Maqbool, with you at PTV World. In today's show, we will be taking a look at what is going on within the country, especially in terms of the upcoming general elections later this year. And of course, the big question mark as to who will be the next caretaker prime minister. And this is not just important in terms of a caretaker setup, but also in terms of the difficult times that Pakistan is going through, both politically and economically, and the challenges that remain in the time frame of either 60 days or 90 days, especially when we talk about the IMF standby arrangement, which of course also will be witnessing a quarterly review under the caretaker setup. And so big question marks remain as to who will be taking up this seat and how exactly will there be consensus on this particular matter. Earlier we also saw that there were reports circulating around the contender being the current finance minister Ishaq Dar, which was something that was then denied by Ms. Sherry Rahman, saying that the PPP had not been given any such name, and that the party in itself is also looking at various contenders and is consulting amongst itself and has not even proposed something yet, and that whatever is going to be the way forward will be with the agreement of all the political parties. And so it is important that the decision is taken with consultation of the current federal cabinet, and that the political parties will be aligned on the matter, something that was echoed later on by the Information Minister Maryam Aurangzeb as well, saying that the decision will be coming in from the consultation of the party leader Mr. Nawaz Sharif as well, and then of course taking on board various political parties as well. So of course this is going to be an important decision, and who it is going to be is something that everyone is talking about. So we're going to try and explore the kind of aspects that the different political parties are going to be considering, and what sort of variables will then define who will be the next caretaker setup. Our first segment will be focusing on this. The next one is going to be taking a look at what is happening, of course, with reference to the international politics. We know that Pakistan has reiterated its stance with regards to the fight against terrorism, claiming also that the Afghan Taliban regime in Afghanistan is providing safe havens to terrorist organizations such as the TTP, something that was also backed by the statement coming in from the US Secretary of State, saying that the Afghan Taliban regime needs to protect the occurrence of terrorist incidents whereby its territories is used against other territories as well. And so now we also saw that there was a meeting between the US Centcom chief and the chief of army staff of Pakistan, whereby different matters were discussed, and Pakistan's efforts towards regional peace were also recognized. And it's important that this development comes after the statements coming in from Pakistan and the US as well, particularly in the aspect to the Afghan Taliban regime and Pakistan's fight against terrorism, both within the country and of course previous efforts as well. So we're going to try and explore that even further in the next segment. For this and more, as always in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi, and we will be joined by other experts online very soon, and I'll introduce them as soon as they've joined us. But Farrukh, let's start with you in terms of the big question as to who will be the caretaker PM, a question that seems to be much more complicated than one would have thought. And at this point, with different political parties still talking about the fact that they're going to follow the procedure, they're going to have consultations, and they're going to come to a consensus as a way forward. But do you think that this is something that will be as straightforward as it seems in terms of the rhetoric, that there will be agreement and there will be one name coming up?
Right, Sana. Let me, because we are talking about media, these reports actually keep coming from media, right? So let me refresh your memory and memory of our viewers what exactly the media has been doing in past 1 year. There have been speculations about everything. For example, when this government actually took over, there were predictions by inside sources, right? There were projections or claims that the elections will be held soon and the government will go back, dissolve itself very soon. It didn't happen. Similarly, when it came to the question of General Bajwa's extension or appointment of an army chief, you saw how media kept on complicating these issues. This is some temperamental issue that is inherent in our media's attitude, right? Similarly, regarding IMF, we kept on seeing the kind of speculations that went on. And now, once again, similar kind of insinuations have actually kind of crippled the circumstances. There are people who kept on telling us that for 1 year there is not going to be any election. There were people who kept on telling us that for a few months at least there will be no caretaker setup, and then this government will continue to govern, or for that matter, if there is a caretaker setup, that the caretaker setup will be indefinitely prolonged, right? With all these things in mind, you have to treat this report that came out regarding Ishaq Dar Saab's possible appointment as the Prime Minister, caretaker Prime Minister, that also with a pinch of salt. And that is exactly what I have been doing. My problem is that with this kind of report and the source that was there, especially the reporter, it becomes difficult for me to actually comment very aggressively on this report, because Shahbaz Rana, that reporter who broke the news, I think very highly of him. I think he is one of the best financial journalists there are. And then Ishaq Dar Saab, again, I have a history, I have very good relations with him. So I thought that I don't want to give impression that I am actually questioning either's integrity. But having said that, otherwise, if there was a reporter that was a beat reporter focusing on one ministry, and that ministry's minister was nominated in such a report, one would have thought that it is probably a feeler that is sent by that ministry, and that reporter is complicit. But in this situation, I don't think that is the case. I think that some over-eager subordinate might have floated the name, and that actually, once it was out of their mouths, it took life of its own. And then Ishaq Dar Saab also complicated the situation by not actually, in his yesterday's interview that was actually played today, he did not actually go out of his comfort zone and rebut these rumors at all. My own point of view regarding the appointment of caretaker setup is that it is a bad idea from beginning to end, because no matter what happens, when you talk about any caretaker government for 3 months, the powers are taken away from the system, and it creates further bottlenecks in the process of governing. So that actually creates a lot of problem. I don't get this fascination with the names of caretakers, whosoever it is of course going to emerge, and people are going to settle with that. But we still have to wait. I have more to add,
yes,
but
continue.
I think, regarding caretaker setup itself, I would have liked eventually for our legislature to do away with the whole idea of a caretaker setup, because usually the powers are taken away from the government that is there, and the election commission actually exercises most of those powers. So in any case, even if this government is there, it could have been a lame duck government, and some other authorities would have taken care that no decision is made that is long-standing or that is going to have an impact for a longer period of time. Whether you appoint Ishaq Dar, whether you appoint an angel from the sky, one party that is never going to be satisfied with the results is PTI. And why? Because they don't only have problem with the previous government, this government's appointment is also something that they don't agree with. Then they have issue with election commission. Then if you take away these issues as well, then they have the problem with the entire state infrastructure, right? With that kind of a situation, I think whosoever you are going to appoint is going to be controversial. So in this situation, I think there's going to be a caretaker setup which will be appointed through consensus between the ruling parties and then opposition leader. But eventually, we have to wait and see how it is received by opposition.
All right. Let us also welcome in the discussion Rana Maqbool Ahmed Saab, Senator PML-N. He's joined us on telephone line, and we'll hopefully get more insight into what's going on from him. Rana Saab, welcome to the show. Can you hear me?
Thank you very much.
Right. So, Rana Saab, first of all, let's begin with the kind of reports that were coming in regarding Mr. Ishaq Dar being the contender. I understand that this has already been denied, but in terms of a potential contender that the PML-N sees, and the reports that are coming in that there is going to be a way forward in terms of a politician or contenders such as Mr. Ishaq Dar moving forward, is this something that you can verify for us?
Yes, Sarah. There is a proposition with the government and with the ruling party and their allies that they need a politician and who is also acquainted with the science of economics and all our economic development knowledge of the system, so that during this interim period he is able to carry on with the plans and the policies which have been of late adopted by the government, and especially keeping in view the new venture of facilitation council, which is mandated for development in main sectors of economy like agriculture, energy and minerals, etc. So they need an expert as well as a political personality who is acquainted with the science of politics as well. So Dar being a multi-dimensional professional, therefore there are certain quarters who are proposing their name. It is not that Dar himself has volunteered or he is insisting on that, not at all. It's the people who are at the helm of decision making at the political echelons. So their thing, because you might have been listening to a variety of opinions that they need a politician as caretaker, they don't need a technocrat, or they don't need exclusively an economist, because they think that you have to have some political acumen as well, simultaneously having some knowledge of economics to carry on policies, because this is a gigantic challenge for any caretaker prime minister to navigate through this turbulence of skyrocketing prices and this unbridled inflation. So keeping in view these challenges, Muslim League and the People's Party, their leaders and bigwigs, they are of this opinion. They have an option to have a man like Dar. More so, other segments and allies, they're also being consulted, and you might have the knowledge of that. The different committees have been formed of, according to our leadership's assessment, of some astute politicians who will be giving suggestions, making proposals and recommendations to the leadership.
Right, absolutely. I understand that, Rana Sahab, but can you also help me understand in terms of course, the way that you would think about the different political parties also coming to the same conclusion? Do you think that the PML-N will be able to propose names that will be something that will be easy to convince other parties for, such as the name of Mr. Ishaq Dar that seems to be one of the contenders that will be proposed?
He looks to be a consensus candidate, and the smaller parties are also amenable, and discussion around and different parleys which are going on and different views which are being floated by different groups. I know what are their views, and they have been discussing since I have been moving all around this Ghulam Gardish of power. So that is there. This is the viewpoint. And no other person has been so far thrown up as candidate for the post of position of this caretaker prime minister, except for Ishaq Dar. So far, this is the situation.
All Right. Let's talk a little bit more about earlier what you were talking about, Farrukh, in terms of the perhaps powers that the caretaker setup is going to have, and there's also reports coming in of perhaps moving forward with a mechanism where those powers can be increased and the caretaker setup be given sort of the same powers as the elected government with, I believe, Section 230 of the Elections Act. So, and this seems to be something that has been confirmed by the PML-N as well, and we'll take Rana Saab's opinion too. But in terms of what you were saying earlier as to skipping the caretaker setup, do you think that this also provides another way forward, another solution to achieve the same goal?
Right. No, I think that is perhaps not going to happen right now, what I was proposing, because at this moment the strength of the parliament is such that they won't be able to actually bring such sweeping reforms. But having said that, I think that it is important to remember that whosoever caretaker setup, whosoever heads the caretaker setup and whosoever is in power at that time should at least have equal powers. Remember, in Constitution there is no restriction on this aspect, right? But in Election Act 2017, there are certain caveats that are given. One, it has to be, the caretaker setup has to be impartial, right? That would essentially eliminate Ishaq Dar Saab's name. Similarly, that would also, clause also takes care of the fact that it will only be responsible for day-to-day affairs. With that kind of a mandate, of course, there's going to be some kind of changes that we can foresee, and that has been, those reforms have been promised by the government as well. But my contention is that these two ideas essentially are in conflict. The idea of a caretaker setup empowered to actually carry on, continue with the, business of governance, and somebody like Ishaq Dar Saab actually heading that dispensation. Why? Because PML-N has been complaining for 1 year that it was asked to take some very tough decisions. And because of that, it had to actually lose political capital. Now, amazingly, at this moment, they get an out when there's a caretaker setup, and that is independent, and that is not associated with PML-N per se. So what happens if that caretaker setup, if it is going to take some very drastic measures, like perhaps privatization or getting rid of certain assets of the government, at that time the face of that government is also, or the head is also from PML-N, right? So that actually doubles down the problem rather than actually removing it. So right now, if my humble submission would have been that a caretaker setup should have somebody who's a ceremonial head. Of course, there are other positions which are very important. For example, finance minister at this moment is a power unto himself, right? So a caretaker government with a ceremonial prime minister, but with that ceremonial prime minister, a finance team that is really killers, right? Who know how to go about things and who are totally, properly empowered, will be able to take care of these matters. My caveats would be that for learning from past experience, any retired judge, anybody who has been actually in that kind of situation, because judges usually are, literalist when it comes to the letter of law. That actually contains or curbs the powers of that government automatically. So my humble submission would be that the caretaker prime minister should not be a retired judge or a lawyer for that matter, because then they curtail their powers. On the first they decide that they are going to not exercise any power at all, and because of that 3 months actually become a humdrum or walk into nothing. So at this moment, this is the whole concern I've got. I think that there are umpteen retired politicians. Remember, Ishaq Dar Saab might not be an MNA, he is a senator, but he is not a retired politician. The word has it that if PML-N actually forms the next government after the caretakers, after the elections, then he might also once again be given some very important portfolio, possibly finance ministry. So how will this work? That becomes a problem as well. So at this moment, I don't think that PML-N and its allies will agree on this, and that's why we heard People's Party. I think Rana Saab is responding to yesterday's news or perhaps some information he has personally, but People's Party today publicly has said it. Haja Asif Saab has actually expressed his doubt on these reports, so we still have to wait and see what becomes of it.
Right, absolutely. And Rana Saab, I'd love for you to also comment on that, but add to it that once we, of course, talk about consensus within the political parties that, of course, the ruling elite have an alliance with, that's one thing, but of course, the next step forward, as we were talking about earlier, is also consensus between the ruling parties and, of course, the opposition as well. And so this is going to be a challenge as well. And I understand that even if there is no consensus, there is a way forward in the Constitution. But in terms of trying and getting there, is there effort being done? And do you think that possibly what will be the proposed name coming in from your side will be something that the opposition can possibly agree on?
So I was listening to Mr. Pitafi, an astute analyst for all practical purposes. He was of the view that this system doesn't fit in the parliament. What I understood in the parliamentary system all over the world, in no parliamentary democracy, the system exists of caretakers, and especially the British parliamentary system, which has been the model all along. So this is a hybrid type of a system, a mixed system, which I think doesn't go in as a suitable mechanism for the preservation of development and continuity of the socio-economic development possibilities, and also having a political grip for 3 months, because it's too short a period for any setup. I personally think it needs to be amended. As far as we say that it has to be neutral, no. Neutral means somebody having some character. So we suffer from one, let's be very frank on that, one challenge as a nation. That is a challenge of degeneration, of ethics, morality, commitment, and that level of dedication which is required. Let's confess that. These are our areas of weaknesses, much more than having partial views or neutral views. That's not the dispute. Dispute is overall conduct of important people and unimportant people, or the people who really matter. That is to be seen. You have been mentioned about the judges, honorable judges. There are exceptions, but excuse me for having this view, what the judges have done with the country. And other echelons of power as well. And general, you might have seen what have they done with the country. Why we are in such a precarious condition. The general comes, 1, 2, 3, Abbasi is there, and Pasha is there, and the person who was of late, he was DGISI, and Bajwa is there, and Rahil Sharif is there. What have they done with the country? And likewise, the honorable judges in today's setup, you might observe the conduct and the contribution about dispensation of justice to the people. So this is the tragic situation for us. Yes, there has to be a few embers amidst heaps of ashes. We have to search for them. Can we search for them?
Absolutely. But Rana Saab, before you move on to the question with regards to the opposition, let me also welcome in the debate Mr. Kamran Murtaza, Senator JUIF, and also take his opinion as to what he has to say. Thank you very much, Mr. Kamran, for joining us. Can you hear me?
You're welcome.
Right. So, Kamran Saab, the situation, of course, with reference to who is going to be the contender is an important one for the caretaker Prime Minister. And there have been numerous reports coming in. And then we also saw those reports being called fake news by the PPP. And it's important, of course, to understand that everybody still is emphasizing on consultation and agreement with reference to these contenders. But what is the JUIF stance with regards to the kind of names that seem to be coming up?
it is the mandate of Prime Minister and the opposition leader who, after the consultation, may nominate a person, and if there is consensus upon a name, then he may be appointed as caretaker Prime Minister. But he should be his qualification should be in consonance with Section 230 of the Elections Act and not in violation of Section 230.
Right, and just to clarify, with reference to the Section 230, we of course also heard that there are going to be measures taken to increase the powers of the caretaker setup. Is this also something that JUF agrees with?
Measures are to be taken as per Section 230, and JUI as part of this government is ready to give its opinion to the Prime Minister on appointment of caretaker Prime Minister. Even consultation, the scope can further be broadened down while appointing the ministers also, and even in the promises, consultation can be carried out between the parties.
Right. Farrukh, when we talk about the way that the caretaker setup, whoever it may be, will be moving forward and the challenges that remain, and then of course the kind of role that the elections are going to, the ACP is going to have to play with the elections. There was earlier also discussion with regards to the consensus, and something that the PPP also addressed in the presser today. They said they of course understand that there is a lot of challenge with incorporating this in the current elections, but there are of course valid concerns being raised with reference to consensus 2023. Do you think that there's any way forward in terms of how the ECP will be incorporating these concerns, or this is something that we have made peace with?
Oh, right, Sana. Just to understand the question, what are those concerns again?
So with the PPP, of course, with reference to the current elections, has raised concerns that because the consensus of 2023 is not yet complete, and so the ECP is, the decision with the ECP is going to be reflected on the previous consensus and not the current one.
Yeah, you're talking about the census, right?
The census, sorry, yes.
Regarding census, I think that is going to be something that is going to actually create a lot of problem in coming days, because one very crucial partner of this government or the coalition is MKM, and MKM has a problem with census, especially 2017 census, because they think that during that census, Karachi's population, while the entire country's population kept on increasing, Karachi's population, and particularly their constituencies, actually shrunk, right? So that is a concern that will keep on, creating problems for the government. At this moment, it seems that most of the parties that are in government have agreed in principle to actually adhere to 2017, census results. But there is another census result that is due any time, and something very interesting happened in the last days of this government. There is going to be a CCI, Council of Common Interest meeting as well. So that meeting also actually raises question whether there is going to be any kind of action on taking into cognizance the new census results. If that happens, Sana, then there is going to be some problem regarding delimitation of constituencies. Population keeps on increasing. Remember, since 2017 to this day, there has been an increase of 50 million people, right? And that is not a small number. That would mean per year 1 crore people have been added to this country's population. With that kind of numbers, and then people aging very quickly as well, especially 18 years old, they have to be actually part of the electoral rolls, and with that you will have to define the new constituencies. So that will take some time as well. So if the CCI approves of the new census and it is taken on a board, then the caretaker setup will need at least 2-3 months more to ensure that those results actually transpire into voting rolls and new constituencies. So that is a complicated situation. We still have to wait and see what actually becomes of it.
Right, and Rana Sahab, this issue with the census is of course just one of the things that the caretaker setup will also be of course looking at. There is also the way forward with the IMF staff standby arrangement and the quarterly review that may fall in the same time period. And so there are going to be very important aspects under the supervision of the caretaker setup as well, and not just with reference to the elections being conducted within the country. These and other aspects, of course, would be in consideration when the political parties are thinking of names. But is there a criteria that is also being defined in terms of the kind of challenges and issues that are going to be dealt with in the current scenario for Pakistan with the political and economic challenges that exist as of now? Or do you think that the way forward with the caretaker setup is only based on political considerations?
I personally think it's more of economic consideration than the political consideration this time, because the nature of this colossal challenge has undergone very big change. It's not only law and order or maintenance of the procedures or taking action against any militant as the chief administrator of the country. He has to be contributing towards the economic amelioration and the economic reforms and financial pursuits. Because our main problem is today, yes, terrorism is there, but most main problem is economic crunch. We have to fight back to that. So we need to have a person who has some acumen and a team of that type who have some acumen to handle these things, to address this predicament of the nation. So that is the general view. It's therefore Mr. Dar's name is time and again coming up for consideration. As far as this election census is concerned, I personally think what I foresee that MKM will go to the court against this, and they'll definitely plead their case that the new census should be the part of the next election framework. And they also think, number one, they have a lot of grouse vis-a-vis that their population, as Mr. Pitafi rightly pointed out, has not been properly counted. They think they are more in number, but they have been counted less in number. Number two, they think that if at all they are considered at this level, an election takes place, and even then they'll not be losing so much as if they are losing right now with the voter list of 2017. So they'll approach the court of law, and maybe the court of law questions the government and the election commission. What are they up to, and what do they do about this situation? That will be there. But there are not many reservations about the procedures and craft of the caretakers. And you might have observed previously, of late, the army chiefs' involvement in all economic great or most important economic ventures. Today he was there in the Seeds Corporation in Hanewal. So it is a new phenomenon as far as this agriculture development is concerned, and likewise mineral development and other projects pertaining to the economy of the country. So situation is very complex, and I don't think so it's so simple that we would understand the intricacies of the system. We'll have to wait for a few weeks, and let's see something very useful and productive gets crystallized in interest of the nation. So therefore, in a few weeks, we have to look into what happens.
Right. Thank you very much, Rana Saab, for joining us and being a part of the debate. That's all that we're going to be focusing on in terms of what is going on politically and, of course, the caretaker setup. And we're going to move on to our next segment, which focuses on the regional and international dynamics, where, of course, the issues with reference to security challenges that remain within Pakistan and, of course, externally as well are important. And for this, of course, we're going to be continuing our discussion with Kamran Murtaza Saab as well. And Kamran Saab, the situation, of course, in terms of what has been said earlier by the Chief of Army Staff and the US side is important in terms of the Afghan Taliban regime moving forward in a way that ensures that their territory is not being used against any other. But of course, in a lot of ways that we've seen that hasn't happened. And now the US Centcom chief has also met with the Chief of Army Staff, reiterating Pakistan's efforts. Does this point towards more scope of cooperation, particularly in terms of the kind of expectation that exists from the Afghan Taliban? Kamran Saab, are you with us? I believe we have lost connection with Kamran Saab, but Farrukh, I'll pose the same question to you in terms of the kind of recent developments that we've seen coming in from both within Pakistan and from the US. Now the meeting between the US Centcom chief and the Chief of Army Staff, does that point towards perhaps any sort of increased collaboration, particularly on the front of the Afghan Taliban regime, ensuring that their territory is not used against any other?
Right. I think that when these statements started coming in, especially because there were attacks in Balochistan recently, and Pakistani government particularly responded to that, and we heard Army Chief actually saying that Afghan soil is being used against Pakistan. After that, we saw that the US also was of the same mind. There was also one point of clarification that emerged from Washington, and that was regarding the accusation that somehow refugees might be involved, Afghan refugees might be involved in such attacks. So the American government actually does not concur. It does not agree that there is such a thing that might be going on. Of course, there are forces inside Afghanistan that might actually send their foot soldiers to Pakistan, and they might, using those safe havens, attack various parts of the country, and that has been continuing on. Unfortunately, because we have this partly tribal, partly medieval culture of blaming anybody who might be there, that actually causes a problem for the most vulnerable people, like refugees who are actually sheltered here. And if you start actually attacking them or criticizing them, that can actually take a very unfortunate direction. So just for the record, government of Pakistan has never accused the refugees of actually indulging in this, but there are people who have been coming over, right? And this historically used to be a very porous border. So what Pakistan at that time said, when Pakistan was criticizing such safe havens in Afghanistan, it actually referred to Doha agreement, right? After that, we saw a reaction coming from Afghan side that Pakistan was not a party to Doha agreement. So then we heard the Americans actually stepping in, and they also reminded them that they had promised in principle not to allow such a possibility. My contention at that time was also the same. It is the same right now, that historically Afghan transition government, that is the Taliban, have never seen such elements that might actually attack civilians, for that matter, as a threat or as a challenge to them. So naturally, all those parties that they said will not be allowed to actually attack the other countries are sitting there, and they are being treated well. Because of that, there is this concern that this region might see some kind of explosion from Afghanistan of more such elements in coming days, because when these people actually get more powerful, they can start attacking as well. So in that context, it is important to remember that Pakistan and the US are critical partners in Afghanistan and regional stability. So that will continue. I think that the Centcom chief's visit and his meeting, and especially his reiteration of the sacrifices rendered by Pakistani side is most welcome. And I think that in coming days we will have to find modalities to keep on working together, to ensure that Afghanistan remains peaceful, it is not a threat to the regional partners and the neighbors. And then of course that there is some kind of way forward when it comes to fixing Afghanistan's biggest problems that are there because of lack of inclusive governance in Afghanistan, that there has to be an answer. And then both these countries are bilateral partners as well. I think Pakistan Army has always worked very close with the US Army, and for that matter Centcom chief. That will also continue.
All right. I'll come to the defense cooperation as well, and particularly how perhaps enhanced military relationship can exist. Before that, I want to understand that when we talk about perhaps meetings like these or statements like these coming from the US, recognizing Pakistan's efforts or saying that there are immense contributions towards regional peace, in the context of what is going on in the region, particularly in terms of the Indian propaganda as well, do you think that these statements also translate into what the actual partnership is in relation to other countries in the region as well, including India, and that Pakistan is also practically valued as a very important partner as much as the statement is pointing towards?
Right, and I think that is a very interesting question, particularly the Indian angle. I think Indian propaganda actually emanates from not a position of caution, but a position of hate. They, especially the ruling party right now, most of their allied media persons who have actually totally become craven. Remember one leader of BJP had said that they were asked to bend, they chose to crawl. So Indian media keeps on crawling and they keep on spewing all this hate propaganda, and in that propaganda world every Pakistani deserves to suffer. And that's why they keep on using all these issues as if Pakistan, whatever Pakistan lost was a long time coming, and it deserved it, and it should suffer more, right? That is what their worldview is. But regardless of that, I think that in recent years we have seen that America has also learned to differentiate between propaganda and serious policy disagreements between Pakistan and the US. That's why you don't see any incendiary statement coming from Washington DC regarding Pakistan's policies or politics, right? We saw that even when there was a drawdown and withdrawal from Afghanistan, the US actually, while the American media and especially the Indian embeds in there kept on trying to blame Pakistan for whatever was happening in Afghanistan, we saw that the attitude of the American government was very gracious and was very supportive of Pakistan, and we saw that on ground Pakistan actually kept on cooperating as well. That was the time when Afghan Taliban also kept helping, because they had to provide a cordon, a security cordon to the airport, so that all that withdrawal can take place, and that did take place, right? And we heard words of gratitude, of course, in lawmaking, legislature, that is US Congress. Then it becomes a different thing, because there are people who want to actually criticize Pakistan because it is a world of lobbying. But having said that, I think Indian propaganda now means nothing when it comes to Pakistan-US relations, when it comes to Pakistan-China, Pakistan-Russia, Pakistan-Arab world relations. That propaganda has fallen on its face. Yes, Rana.
Right. And Farrukh, when we talk about the increased military cooperation, particularly when we talk about the Afghan Taliban regime, and of course Pakistan's issues with regards to terrorist organizations such as the TTP, I understand that the US statement is calling for action from the Afghan Taliban regime to ensure that their soil is not used against any other territory. But in practical terms, particularly with reference to Pakistan's efforts with the TTP and other terrorist organizations, do you see any sort of cooperation that can particularly exist between the US and Pakistan that's aimed towards this particular issue, both within Pakistan and then on the cross-border area as well, and then how to ensure that the Afghan Taliban regime actually does so what is expected of it?
I think there's only one thing that can take place right now, because the US is not actually physically present on ground in Afghanistan. So they can only be over the horizon attack. And we saw Zawahiri actually being killed as a result of that. But after that, there has been this impression that Afghan Taliban and the US government have actually moved closer, that there is more trust between the two. Even though that there was some kind of tit-for-tat reaction within Afghanistan, it was thought that perhaps it was Afghan TTP that actually that was TTP in Afghanistan that blew the whistle, and that's how this gentleman Ahmad Zawahiri was actually killed, and because of that somebody actually was traumatized or somebody was exposed. Then we saw a TTP leader also being killed as a reactionary measure, and then after that we saw that Afghan Taliban's leader's brother was also killed. That kind of situation, a tense calm remains in Afghanistan. There are many forces within Taliban's own big tent movement. But having said that, I think that that is the extent of it. A country which is totally unplugged from the world when it comes to economic matters, which is totally unplugged from the UN system, a country that is unplugged from its regional partners as well. How exactly can you force its hand? The only possible way out would have been presence of a counterpoint, another party that could have, and that is not within Afghan Taliban, that is something independent of Afghan Taliban that could pose a challenge. But this is something amazing that we have seen in the past 3-4 years. Everywhere it seems to be that there was an effort to totally bulldoze the possibility of an opposition. In Afghanistan, in Pakistan, when the former party, PTI was in government, there was total and systematic dismantling of various other parties that are now in power. Similarly, in India also, the opposition parties that once ruled were totally demolished. So this is something that has happened in this region. I don't know who was behind it, whose bright idea it was. But right now we don't have the kind of reset button that is needed to correct the direction of Afghan Taliban. So the US's ability to influence Afghanistan's outcomes are less. Perhaps Pakistan could have done more, but I don't know how.
All right. Thank you very much, Farrukh, for that, and for, of course, being with us on the debate as always. That's all that we have from the show. Of course, there's much more that we will be exploring within this week as well. And so with developments in the political arena, particularly with the upcoming elections, and of course, for that, you'll have to keep watching the debate. That's all that we have from the show. See you tomorrow.